This is Alabama Politics with Steve Flowers, an in-depth interview with Alabama's top political newsmakers. Now, from the studios of Troy University, here is Steve Flowers.
I'm Steve Flowers, and welcome to Alabama Politics. Folks, we have as our guest my perennial guest and longtime, lifetime friend, McArthur is our guest, and Mac and I are going to talk politics like we do a couple times a year. He and I talk it more than just a couple times. We're going to talk on the air, though. Some of y'all may have noticed that Mac comes on my show a lot. He's one of my best political friends. He's a state political treasurer. He knows Alabama politics right and left. He's been head of the State Employees Association for 21 years, and he was Ethics Commission chairman before that. And if y'all notice that guy I'm talking to 12 years ago when I filmed this show first time, 12 or 15 years ago, it's his daddy. Mr. Gene McArthur was a long-time leading citizen of Ashford, where Mac grew up and born and raised. And McArthur's been in Henry County, that part of Henry County, since that county has been born. And the McArthurs have been there, McArthurs and Baxley's. And that's how old Mac got into politics. The Baxleys and McArthurs go back generations. They were the original founders of Houston County, down around Dothan and Ashford. And then that's how Mac got started in politics, working for Attorney General Bill Baxley, and that's my first job too, was with Bill Baxley. He was Attorney General.
Absolutely.
Mac, good to have you on the show again, my friend.
Steve, thank you for having me. I really appreciate
21 years head of the State Employees Association.
Yes, sir. And
your daddy been passed away 8 years now.
We had his funeral 8 years ago today.
I'll be doggone. He was right on the front of my show.
He was. He was so proud of you being from home and all. And
our families go back, don't they?
They do. Well, my whole lifetime. He so enjoyed doing the tours at Chapel, being a docent. He really enjoyed it.
He loved that. He and my uncle Maurice Miller were best friends.
They were. They were indeed. Mr. Maurice, of course, was a legendary history teacher. Some of the university folks say to be the best in the state. There at a small school. And he and Daddy, of course, Mr. Maurice was in the 101st Airborne and parachuted in
World War II.
In D-Day.
He showed us. He had a back from that parachuting in.
He was hurt parachuting, and I think he took shrapnel as well, and followed him his whole life. Like most from that generation, they spoke very, very seldom about the war, and
they would not talk about it. Even guys I knew who went to Vietnam. That's just something people won't talk about.
I felt it. The once or twice Mr. Maurice said anything about it, and it was very limited. I felt very honored, but it was almost as if it was a huge burden they were toting around from having done it, and at the same time an honor, if that makes sense.
You know, you told me something I know. I knew he had parachuted in, but I didn't know it was on D-Day.
It was on D-Day. He might have been in that second wave, which would have been the night of D-Day.
Yeah.
But I think he was in the first wave.
Mac, now when you first, back to your history, you went to Auburn undergraduate school.
Yes, sir.
And then to law school. Well, your first job was a Baxley, wasn't it?
It was.
When he was Lieutenant Governor, not Attorney General.
Right. I had the privilege in
What year was that been?
1982. He got elected Lieutenant Governor, and I had the privilege of being a campaign coordinator at 18 years old for Houston County. There was a
in that year?
It would have been 78.
When he ran for
governor. I was 18 years old, and they were, or 19 years old.
He carried Houston, didn't he?
He carried Houston by a good margin. There was a friction between a couple of factions, and he said, well, you'll be my county coordinator, which made you feel awful good. Nothing went with that, but being around Bill, having a chance to work with Bill, and then the 4 years as lieutenant governor was among the greatest privileges of my life.
Now let me say, so you ran his Houston County campaign in '78, you were still in college then.
I was still in college.
Uh-huh.
The primary was early then.
Uh-huh.
And so it was September primary.
Yeah.
Of course, Auburn started school late.
Uh-huh.
So I got to finish up and head back to Auburn. I'd been there a year.
And that's the year that Favre won the governor.
That's the year that Governor James won. Of course, he won. We made the runoff, but he won in the runoff, and then was elected governor.
Did you know after y'all went in runoff that Favre had a lead and he was going to win that race? Pretty much, y'all knew that. Did you think y'all had a chance in runoff? He'd come out of nowhere and had that thing.
I reckon I was young enough and foolish enough to think we had a chance, but and knew Bill, knew the quality of the man and the quality of the candidate. But I think Governor James, he ran the guy out of Delos Walker out of Memphis.
That's a heck of a story.
And he just ran a fantastic campaign and certainly.
Mac, what about, and so '82, you went ahead and finished up Auburn, and you worked, and your first real job was when he got elected lieutenant governor.
Right, I left law school and at Alabama, finished up at Jones while he was lieutenant governor. And Steve, it was just a tremendous opportunity. Working with Bill, he was one of those people, the more you were around, the more your respect for him grew. Not only his intellect, which I've never had the privilege, whether it be in law or in politics, of dealing with anybody I thought had the IQ of Bill Baxter.
Well, he had a photographic memory. Baxter probably was a genius. There ain't many people that you meet in your life that are real genius. Baxter was really it was genius.
I believe that. I saw him a few years ago argue a case that he made an hour-and-a-half constitutional argument and looked down at his notes only in the last 5 minutes and to pick up one line he had left out. And you had people like now Judge Jimmy Poole, Bobby Siegel, Judge Gene Reese were sitting there like I was. I was just amazed of the ability in his 70s. I mean, that was just phenomenal.
I remember one time when I worked for him as a young man, he was Attorney General during the 74, 78 time, or 70 to 74, I forgot. It would have been around 74 to 75. I worked for him for 3 or 4 years. Remember old Trooper W.T. Moore?
who
drove him?
Who was Bill's, he was a captain when I worked for
W.T.
Bill.
passed away? He's still living.
I put so many people in the grave that not there, I hate to say, but I hadn't heard from W.T. in a long time, I'll say it that way.
W.T. was driving us from Montgomery to Birmingham and going fast, and the state trooper, Baxter, was Attorney General. And Baxter was going up for an appeals on a murder case, arguing the state's position, and going up against Drew Redden, who was the best criminal lawyer by far in the state.
Still a legend.
Legendary. And I guess Redden had probably spent days preparing. Baxter had not even looked at the case. And on the hour drive to Birmingham, studied that thing, said, "Three, y'all be quiet, and I can't talk politics going up here. I got to study this case." And I guess with that photographic memory, he just made Drew Redden like an idiot. The best down to criminal defense lawyer in the state.
Steve, among the many things I remember about Bill was when the first Lieutenant Governor's Conference came up, and that would have been in the spring of '83. He took me with him, and it was a wonderful experience that I still appreciate and relish, and still appreciate and relish his not only his friendship but his mentorship, because the more you were around him, the more you realize what a brilliant political mind.
Baxter had a lot of friends. He's had a wonderful life and had a lot of friends being in politics all of his life. But you about one of Baxter's best friends.
Well,
you one of the few y'all just sit down and talk on the phone. Baxter's a little bit reclusive now. He stays with his family and stays in Birmingham, works about 3 hours a day as law practice, goes home, takes a nap, or reads or whatever. I saw him in the airport. I was going on some kind of conference, and I saw him at the Birmingham airport, and he's grinning and says, "Tree, I read the Tuscaloosa News to get your column." Of course, he reads it for the sports page too.
Yeah.
Tuscaloosa News got me the best paper in the state.
Yes,
Everybody
I
in
think
Birmingham,
it is.
see that Birmingham ain't got no newspaper, so they read the Tuscaloosa News. They just encroach, but Tuscaloosa become Tuscaloosa and Birmingham's newspaper. And Baxter said, I wait every Wednesday to read your column. But people who know him, you about the only one really sits down and he talks to about that.
Well, he's been so good to my family and I. And
Mac, tell me
Yes,
this. There's a funny story, and I got it in my book. I got a couple of stories from you and Baxter in my book called Goats and Governors, you know.
yes, sir.
And the one I like is a cigar story. We've told it on the air before, and that's in my book. Now, Baxter was, people don't know this, during that 82 to 86 time, Wallace liked Baxley.
Yes,
Even though Baxley was a progressive and progressive on the race issue, Wallace really liked Baxley a lot. They were close buddies.
And you remember, Tree, Wallace had a rebirth
Right.
as far as the race issue. And I had an aunt that lived down in Lakeland and where the Tigers play, and I'm a big Red Sox
baseball
fan.
Yeah.
And so went out to visit her and went over to Ybor City, Tampa.
This is during the 82, 86 time. You worked with Baxley.
83.
Was Baxley wasn't a Red Sox fan, was he?
Oh, he's big Red
So
Sox
that's
fan.
why. Is that why you're a Red Sox fan? Because of Baxley?
No, my father. They used to play when they would come break spring training back in the 40s. They'd play a game in Dothan on the way back up.
The Red Sox, and that's
Yeah.
why Baxley became a Red Sox fan. That's why they
Yes.
stopped in Dothan and played.
Yes.
Dothan was a big baseball.
Yeah, Ted Williams, and then of course you had the owner for a while was from Dothan.
So that's why all y'all were Red Sox fans.
A lot of Red Sox fans down
Well, you know,
there.
my side of people in Pike County were Cardinal fans.
Yeah,
But people in the South would love the Cardinals.
because they could get them on the radio at night.
And they would have Southern players.
The legendary Pat Lindsay was a big Cardinal fan because you could hear them at night.
That's all anybody in the South. My granddaddy, when television started in North Pike County in China Grove and Orion, he thought that he'd gone to heaven when he could sit there and watch television and get Dizzy Dean and the Cardinals.
Dizzy Dean.
See, everybody in the South listened to the Cardinal baseball. But y'all were Red Sox fans. Go back to that story I interrupted.
And so it had rained, so there's nobody much there. And I go in, and there's this gentleman. He's an older guy, and he's a Cuban refugee from when Batista was overthrown by Fidel Castro.
Y'all have seen the Major League Baseball game.
Yes, and so
Exhibition
he's rolling the cigars, and I got to talking to him, and he said, "Your accent," and meaning Southern drawl, and I said, "Yes, sir, I'm from Alabama." He said, "Do you know George Wallace?" And I said, "Well, yes, sir. I'm not close personal friends with him." And he said, "I like George Wallace," and I think he said he would been for him when he ran for president or something. And he said, "I want to send him some cigars."
He knew he liked cigars.
Gets this wooden box with cigars, and they're all hand rolled. And he said, "I give you some where you don't steal his cigar."
Mac, tell me the story about the Chilton County man too, about the man in Chilton County. Now, what race was that? Was it 86?
1986.
86 governor. Now, back he's running for governor against.
Bill, Governor Wallace is not running. Bill is running, and it was a race in which
Johnny Graddick race. It's the Graddick race.
And, Fobb.
Was Mac Miller in that race too?
Yeah, and you know that was it had a lot of heat between Graddick and Fobb. And
But y'all had a campaign man in Chilton
County who bless his heart, he had some problems. He had him a slate of candidates because Bill didn't know anything about it. He dispatched.
He drank a lot too, didn't he?
Yeah.
And Chilton was a dry county.
But I met a young campaign worker from Birmingham, and I was the old guy in the bunch at 25, but it was Paul Hamrick who was working for former federal Judge Dean Buttram, who was doing the northern part of the state for Baxley. And I met Paul there, And we walk in, and it was like a warehouse sort of, and at the back of the room, this fellow was sitting, and he had on a T-shirt with a hole in it, and a bottle of whiskey of some sort on the counter, and it was all of 8 to 8:15, 8:30 in the morning, and he had this candidate and that candidate. He had a few bachelor signs too. And I said, oh, we got a real problem here. I said, you got to lose this bottle of whiskey, not thinking about it. Well, it's a dry county, and it's 8:15 in the morning. This show ain't helping no votes. And had all these different campaigns, and I
Did you tell Baxter about it?
Well, they decided that we didn't need to tell Bill a lot about that he got real upset. But this fella decided he'd move on to a different campaign and all. And I think we actually made a good race.
Matt, old Dean Buttram worked for Baxter every campaign.
Yes,
Do you
sir.
know me and Dean Buttram and Gary Aldridge
Yeah.
were Baxter's boys, and we're going to run the state. He took us all aside, and he says, now, Tree, you're going to have South Alabama. Dean, you're going to have up there where you from, around the center. And Gary, you're going to have the Tennessee Valley. He gave us parts of the state to campaign. And we did. And Dean had campaigned from every election.
Let me tell you, of course, Dean's father was a legend up there.
Yeah, he had Dean's drugstore.
And
he was named Dean Buttram.
Dean Buttram, and he had the bank. He was a
that's right.
Didn't own it all, but was a significant stockholder.
Yeah.
And we'd go to something up in center Alabama. Cherokee County is about 8,000 people, I think, back then. And you go to something up in center Alabama, and it looked like you were having a massive rally. I mean, you had 2,000 or 3,000 people out, and folks had a tremendous fondness for now former federal Judge Dean Buttram and his father both.
We were little boys campaigning for Baxter. I met his daddy and everything. Went to Dean's drugstore.
Yes.
Everything. Anyway, back to Lean. I had named him Lean Mean Dean for some reason. Why I call him, and I'm the only one that calls him that. And you know who worked for him? Jenny Shaver, who is the representative from Cherokee County now.
That's right.
I've got another show on public television, and I had her on there, and when I'm saying, Jenny, do you know Dean Buttram?
Absolutely.
I'm just absent-minded. She said, Mr. Flowers, I worked for him as his legal secretary for 10 years.
Yeah.
She told me stories about that booger.
And, of course, her husband
is a sheriff.
Sheriff, and before that was a legendary state trooper up there.
Right.
And quite a political family in her own right. And then, of course.
So you knew that about her before she got down here?
Absolutely.
Did you know her before she got down here?
I remember her working for Dean.
Do you remember that?
And more than that, I remember Dean calling me and saying, this lady is the real deal. And, of course, they had just a legendary representative, Richard Lindsay.
Oh, that's right, yeah.
And when Richard
and I were
decided
best
not
friends
to
in the
run,
legislature.
yes, y'all sat next to one
yeah,
another. Decided not to run.
Real gentleman.
Shaver. Yes.
And so Jenny followed Lindsay.
Yes. And
now she's a Republican, though.
Yes.
So that was going to be a Republican. You know what she told me? She told me that vacation, recreation, tourism was their biggest industry now.
I
bigger than chicken farming.
I would thought agriculture, but
I thought chicken farming was all that area.
Of course, you got Wise Lake.
That's
it's certainly
what it is.
A beautiful place. The mountains.
She
and all
told me
that.
that tourism is now that area's biggest industry. Said it was Marshall County too, as big as poultry is in Marshall.
Really?
That whole area, that people have found that area.
Well, I reckon you're not that far from Atlanta. You're not that.
It is
Birmingham.
the prettiest part of the country.
Beautiful and wonderful people, just wonderful. But the center. If you go to the downtown, it's just like stepping back, and so wonderful. I say that as a compliment. People are so nice, and it's a wonderful place to go.
Back to you worked for Baxter. What year did you become? How many years were you ethics chairman?
I was ethics chairman from '94 to '97.
Okay, during that, and then you were going to run for attorney general in '98.
Right.
There's the classic story, the Matt McArthur story I've used 100 times about name ID. Share it with them, because I've shared this 100 times. I think I've shared it on the air about, I use a Seth Hammock example. When Seth was Speaker of the House, had been Speaker of the House 8 years. Shows you how little name ID legislators have. By the way, Seth's 73rd birthday was yesterday.
Awesome.
His 73rd birthday was
young.
yesterday.
Still looks young.
He looks young. But Seth Hammett and I sat by each other for 16 years in the House. Me and Seth and Jimmy Holly all sat together. But anyway, back to Seth running for governor. Well, he was Speaker of the House, probably the second most powerful man in Alabama. But he was going to run for governor, and Lucy Baxley was lieutenant governor. Bill's wife, Lucy, was lieutenant governor. and he was going to run, and she was going to run. And he had a name ID poll done, and it came back, and he had 2 or 3% name recognition, and Lucy had 86. So he said, "I'll just stay Speaker if you don't mind." You know, but the one I use after that is when you going to run for Attorney General. Tell that story.
Well, I had the privilege of being ethics director, and had the chance to work with some mighty good people who had been on the Ethics Commission: Dean Buttram, Whit Armstrong, Mr. Frank Mason, Mr.
Was Dean on the Ethics Commission?
He was chairman while I was there, and before he became federal judge. And so, you know, you're on the front page of the newspaper and on these shows like yours, and you feel like everybody in the state knows you. So they come to show me a poll. And they were so excited, and they said, you polled at 4.3%. Pryor had been appointed Judge Pryor, 11th Circuit, had been appointed Attorney General, and he was like at 4.7, and I was at 4.3, something like that. And I sat there, and they were so excited, and they were doing graphs and all this kind of stuff, and I reckon I didn't have enough reaction, and they said, well, what do you think about it? And I said, well, it seems like to me I could walk naked through Winn-Dixie because nobody would know who I was.
I love to tell that story. I told that to Seth after I heard it from you. Seth said, "Seth, those three don't look so good." None of them have any name ID. They all think they got name ID in the legislature.
When Speaker Hammett was talking about running for governor, and Seth Hammett, I think most people would say was a great speaker, and I think Matt McCutcheon is following in that similar type, very fair and very firm, and good people.
Yeah.
But Jimmy Holly had just had State Senator Jimmy Holly had just had a race in which they had commercials run in the Montgomery media market. And Jimmy Holly's name ID was 3 or 4 times Seth Hammett's. And Seth Hammett was one of the, you said, second most powerful, maybe the most powerful man in the state of Alabama. And you just kind of scratched your head. Not that Jimmy Holly wasn't a powerful, or is not a powerful state senator, he is, but it just shows that, you know, as great as Seth Hammett's 3-term speaker, the longest serving speaker along with Jimmy Clark of any speaker in the history of the state of Alabama.
Now, McArthur was speaker how many, a couple times?
2, I think.
2 times, okay.
Rankin Fight was 2, wasn't he?
Yeah.
Sage Lyons 1, I
Rankin
believe.
was in between times, though.
Yeah.
He was, I was a page when old Rankin Fight was speaker, and he had palsy. He shook when he had that thing, but he was a real character, buddy.
And I only knew him by reputation.
Yeah.
I never
I
knew
never
him.
knew him personally. I was just a little boy. He was speaker. And I tell you who did know him, though, who served with him. Tell you how long, Jabbo Wagner's been in the legislature so long, since '66. He remembers Rankin being speaker when he was a freshman House member.
The Jabbo and I, Senator Wagner and I, got on the elevator, the back elevator, and there was a newer member of the legislature on there, and we were having a conversation, had nothing to do with the legislation, and he said, "How long you been doing this?" And I told him, and I said, "You were chairman of Ways and Means," you know, and he went to the Senate in the special election of '83, and of course the Jefferson County delegation was a 1-vote majority, and I think he chaired it too, and the guy was looking at us, and of course, you know, Jabbo hadn't aged a bit
No.
in the last 20 or 30 years. I think I've aged for both of us, but he was just quite a legend. He is quite a legendary figure, and recent and receiving some accolades.
My column this week's about Jabbo.
Awesome.
It comes out tomorrow. Read it and let me know what you think about it. I talk about Jabbo. Jabbo's got a civitan club. It's called his personal civitan club in Vestavia that meets He meets once a month. He's got every politico in Jefferson County in his own private civitan club. I go to it once a month in Vestavia, and he had Tom Albritton on, the current ethics chairman, who don't get out much, but he had him up there speaking one day, and Albritton did not know the story of when the first ethics law passed, and Rankin Fight voted against it. And they went up and said, well, why'd you vote against it, Mr. Speaker? Wasn't tough enough.
No, it wasn't tough enough.
Mac, one final thing. We only got about a minute left. Let's give a plug for you've been a state employees head for 21 years. Y'all got a pay raise this year.
We did, and I'll say this: Governor Ivey and her finance director Kelly Butler, and Chairman Greg Albritton and Steve Klaus, Chairman of Ways and Means of the House, they did a marvelous job of putting state employees first, and coming with a pay raise this year after the one last year, after being in the wilderness for a while, was very important and much appreciated, and thanks go to all those folks.
Well, let's give a special plug to our mutual friend and our fellow Wiregrass person, Steve Klaus.
Awesome. He was just on the cover of our magazine.
That's what I want to tell folks. If all the state employees who are watching, get y'all's magazine out, and you'll see Mac's column in there every time. But on the front's our mutual friend from the Wiregrass, and my lifetime friend, Steve Klaus.
And my dear friend.
And Mac's good friend. Folks, our time is up as it goes by in a hurry. Our guest today has been my longtime friend and legendary political mind, Mac McArthur, who's head of the State Employees Association. We thank you folks for watching, and hope you tune again next week for Alabama Politics. Thank you, Mac.
Thank you.